Hi everyone, this is another look at OneForm. Today we're going to go over values, meaning values that you can customize or control outside of OneForm. Right now, you can pass in a values prop, and in that values prop, you can pass in an object, and that object can have a value in it, and it can have other values in it too. Like you could have an email in here, and the email could be something like me@example.com. Yeah, great. Or yeah, whatever. That could work. Here you would have form fields, just like we did last time. But there's no last time because maybe you haven't seen last video. I don't know. So it was OneForm.field, and then we can create an input in here. And the input could have a name, and the name should match the value you're trying to put into it. In this case, we could have an email, and then we could have a name. The order doesn't matter. You could arrange these however you want. You could even have two name fields. That's fine too. Doesn't matter. They'll both have the same value of my name, Kevin Gadiani, but nothing, there's no but. There's no but. Okay. But if you change one, it changes the other. It keeps them in sync. I guess, yeah, if you do care about that, changing one of these does change the other one. Okay. If we're looking at this, we have two fields in our form, and we have values. And we can change these values now. But there's a problem. Now I have removed it, and I'll Control Z it back. This is supposed to be in a component. Yeah. And if this component, example form, gets props passed to it, that will cause it to re-render. And it doesn't even need props necessarily. If the parent of example form re-render, what's going to happen is these values, because they're passed in as an object that's created on the fly when this function is called, will get recreated again. OneForm expects this to be memoized. What that means is if you pass in values and then you change it and you pass it in again, it's going to clear out the form state. And now the values are going to be these again, no matter what you typed. So if you want to fix that kind of stuff, what you need to do is you need to make sure that example form is memoized. That's number one. It takes no props. As long as nobody passes a prop, then you're safe. When you export it, you would do something like this. Memoized. And this is a React thing. This is not something special I've done. We would import memo from React, something like that. And then down here, we would do let me make sure that. You can import this function memo from the React library. Okay. Memoized. Example form. It doesn't have to have the same name, but it's good practice. And I'm just going to keep it on separate lines because you can't see it. Memo, and then we'd put our example form in there. And then now we can export this one. So it's kind of similar to what you might be familiar with the connect function in Redux, but we do have to, we should name this. Otherwise, the dev tools aren't going to be very useful to you. You name it as a variable. You wrap your form component, not OneForm, but the one that's the form component that you created, in React's memo function. And if you didn't want to import it, you could also do react.memo. That's another way to do it. And then you export it like so. Very simple. And now it's memoized. And as long as it doesn't take in any props, you're good. Now let's say it does take props. Let's say it takes a fun prop. Let's say it takes a fun prop. Then we need to change a few things. Number one, because it can't be implicitly returning the form. It has to do one of those. And then in here, we might have, I have no clue what we're gonna do with fun. We're gonna have a variable called times. So you can have fun times, and this will set times. Yeah, there we go. And it's a use state, and bam, right? The problem is now that if somebody passes in fun, this value gets changed again, and then OneForm will clear out the form. But that's also not what we want. What we would have to do is memorize. Now it sounds like this is like some weird hack you have to do to make OneForm work. No. This is how React normally works. And I'm depending on you using React the way it's intended. If you're doing something weird like this, it's not the way it's intended. It's meant to have these values memoized. It would be like initial values, initial values. Oh my gosh, shift key. But you would want to memoize it. The fact that this is taking a prop, it's not a big deal. We've fixed it, but let's pretend it's not there for now. You would want to do a use memo on your initial values. And you'll want to return this object. And basically the second arg is when you're listening for changes. If somebody changes nothing, that basically at the point that this component mounts, this will be the value, the initial values. It will be this value that was created the one time. And that will always be the value for the entirety of example form's existence. If you mount another one, it'll have a different initial values, because this will get called again on a separate instance of example form, and you'll have a different set of values here. You can think of this use memo almost like a constructor function in a class. It's very similar. The difference is, though, that you can pass something here and you can have these values update for some reason. If the name was being passed into your form, you can put the name down here and you can make the initial, you can basically say, if somebody changed the name outside of this, we want to make that in the form now. So you would get rid of the email, or you put the email there and then you put the name in there. Now, the way OneForm works right now is if values come in, it doesn't just merge them in, it actually replaces every value in the form. If you need to merge them, I haven't figured out that API yet. But basically, there might be some API to allow you to merge values. You don't have to put this in and put it in the form. But basically, if you do pass name, it will destroy all the values in here. And not if you pass name, but if name updates and you pass a new object to values, everything in the form will be destroyed. And it sounds like, why would you do that? That sounds weird. The reason it sounds weird is because you're expecting something else outside of OneForm to control the form state. OneForm controls the form state. Think of this like a Redux or a state management library. If you pass a new initial state to Redux, it's going to clear out everything and make a new state. That's what you're doing here. Is essentially this is a way to clear out the form. You can reset it very easily by just passing initial values again, or not necessarily initial values. You have to pass a new object with the same values on it. But if you need to reset the form, that's the way to do it. You would just pass values and it would reset it. And in those cases, those values would be something like this. They'd look something like this if you reset the form. There are ways to do it. This is a way to make it work. This wouldn't be initial values, though. This would be reset values. And you would have to pass a new object anytime you wanted to reset it. This would be listening for something, some value that changed, which would recreate this object with the reset values. There are other ways to do it. Maybe you could call a function when you want to do it, but you do want to keep these memoized unless you want to. There are other ways to manage this form to reset the values, but that's just like an introduction on how you would use the values field in OneForm. And the main reason for using this is if you have values come from the API, when you want to edit a form. If you had already submitted your form and now you want to edit it, this is the way you would edit it is by passing in values here. And usually they're just initial values. And after that, you let OneForm do its thing. And then when you submit the form, then you can do whatever you want at that point. And if you do need to change these, you do have the option. You never have to unmount the form and remount it to change the values. That's a pretty powerful mechanism for updating and initializing values in OneForm. Hopefully that's helpful to anybody. This is just the early look at the API. It's not like total functions. It's not meant to be like the tutorial videos on how to use it. It's basically like, here's how it works. Or here's how I'm intending to make it work, is what I should be saying.